Here you go again, you say you want to freedom. Well, who am I to keep you
All right.
down?
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just start with a word of prayer before we get into the presentations. So, heads bowed and eyes closed. Dear Father, our God, we thank you for this day and we thank you for this opportunity to get together, to learn, to share views, ideas, policy changes. We pray, God, for this event, that it is successful, that all of the persons here benefit from it. We pray for the food and the reception that will follow, that the food will do everyone's bodies good. And as everyone leaves and travels home, we pray for traveling mercies as well. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Okay, so good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Latoya Smith. I am a senior policy advisor within the governor's office. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this first event in the 50th anniversary learning series. As the bank celebrates this milestone, we wanted to make every effort to ensure that we work towards increasing the engagement with stakeholders and the general public in a meaningful, productive, and progressive way. So one of the ways we are doing this is through the recently launched Harborside Chats with the Governor. This aired last week, well, in the last month in March. And if you did not get the opportunity to see Governor make his TV hosting debut, you are also able to view it on the bank's YouTube channel. So we encourage you to look out for additional episodes in the coming weeks. Another way we are doing this, a part of the 50th anniversary, is through a documentary that's being worked on by the bank and should be released this year as well. And finally, this learning series that we're now participating in is another way that the bank is working to engage with the public, increase knowledge, increase understanding of what's going on with the bank, and get your views and feedback as well. So in the learning series, we will touch on a range of different topics of relevance to the financial sector, as well as the broader Bahamian economy. It is our hope that these forums will provide an opportunity for the public to get a better understanding of a better understanding of the bank, get better acquainted with its purpose, as well as ongoing policy initiatives. We will be working to strengthen financial literacy and support better knowledge of the various financial sector agents and the way they interact with each other. We also want to hear and learn from you how the domestic and international policies impact you and your respective fields. So again, this is an open discussion. We want to hear your questions and your comments and your views on the policy changes. During the bank's 50 years of service, it has effectively and efficiently led the economy through various economic shocks, policy adjustments, and changes in the global regulatory demands. The bank has grown and evolved to meet the needs of a dynamic, small, open economy while maintaining monetary policy stability, predictability, and confidence. One of the key aspects of the bank's role and functions is maintaining the fixed parity between the Bahamian dollar and the US dollar. And a critical aspect of this is ensuring that the Bahamians, as well as international investors, continue to have the confidence in the stability, confidence and convenience awarded by this arrangement. So the subject of this discussion tonight is a timely one. We want to make efficient use of our time, so I will just briefly introduce all of our speakers. Once they've all presented, we'll open up the floor for questions and answers. Governor Rolle will get the conversation started by touching on the bank's monetary policy framework and the significance of exchange controls in supporting the bank's function of maintaining balance of payment stability. He will also provide an overview of the bank's strategic work to support this gradual exchange control liberalization, with a view to encourage investment and growth while maintaining policy stability, monetary stability, and limiting pressures on external reserves. Governor Rolle will be followed by Mr. Gerard Horton, a former manager of the Exchange Control Department, who will offer some more historical context and speak on how the department has evolved over time. I think many of you would remember when we all used to fill out forms in the exchange department upstairs in order to get foreign exchange at the commercial banks. So over time, the bank's delegated authority has increased quite significantly, and there's not much even need to enter the banks at this stage. Mr. Horton was very important and instrumental in this gradual process. The final presenters will be Ms. Ashlee Bethel and Ms. Aniska Russell, who are currently working in the department, and they intimately work with the day-to-day operations of Exchange Control and its administration. They will speak on the most recent relaxation measures and perhaps touch on the way forward. So without further delay, I invite Governor Rolle to start with his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, LaToya. And I also want to give a special thank you to Mr. Horton for being present this evening. I also see some former Exchange Control colleagues in the room, so I think they're here to make certain that we get the story right. Just very briefly, in terms of what it is that we're trying to do strategically, the best way to summarize it is to remove the central bank as much as possible from the ordinary citizen's ability to transact and to get foreign exchange without losing control of how you manage the process and without undermining the stability of the process. So everything that you will hear in terms of where we're going has focused on how we reduce the central bank's visibility so that people can do what they need to do without necessarily thinking about, where we are in that process. LaToya mentioned how people used to come to the central bank and get the approval for exchange control and how that has changed. And so that will feature, I think, in some of what you hear. But a very interesting anecdote. We did a stakeholder engagement survey in the last 5 years, the general public, to ask them if they know or anything about the central bank or hear about the central bank. Now, if you do a stakeholder engagement survey, you'd probably be terrified if you get very, very low name recognition, right? Well, certainly if you're a political party. But for us, it was around about maybe 16%. Less than 20% of Bahamians acknowledge either dealing with us or understanding much about, what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And the reason why I'm saying that is because in the 16% or the lower percent that did say they dealt with us, they typically were those who were interacting with us largely for exchange control reasons. But the 100% of the population are doing transactions that are impacted by the policies and the administrative measures that we have in place. So I think that is a testament really of the extent to which we've withdrawn from the process, and there's largely mostly just the reliance on for some residual activity through the central bank. And so in that 16%, or less than 20%, you would have had the attorneys and some of the persons who might be chaperoning foreign investors through certain processes or getting real estate transactions through, and in those cases coming to the central bank for approval. So that to us was a good story, but it doesn't mean that if you struck exchange control out of the conversation and you talk generally about U.S. dollars and foreign exchange, people didn't have an appreciation for what the rules were. And so what we want to do is to get people to understand a lot more what this is all about. And the best way to summarize it is to say that we just want to make certain that we always have enough foreign exchange or foreign reserves to preserve the one-to-one relationship of the Bahamian dollar and the US dollar. So everything we do is directed towards that. But admittedly, some of the exchange control policies do get wrapped up into the government's foreign investment policy. And to that extent, we have to all appreciate that an element in foreign investment policy is that we also decide to that policy how much and what sectors we want non-Bahamians to participate in. And some of those policies aren't necessarily related specifically to exchange control objectives, so we need to appreciate that. But a good deal of those do relate to an underlying objective of exchange control, which is making sure that the foreign exchange flows, are preserved. And on a day-to-day basis, what we're focused on is just balancing the uses against the sources. And so on a weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly and annual basis, we have a monetary model, and basically it says, well, how much did the external reserve change and why did it change, right? Or how much do we think it will change in the future? And that basically means that we can tell everything that needs to be told about the economy by just looking at the balance sheets of the financial institutions, looking at the deposits, which is showing everything that's happening with how foreign exchange are coming in, credited in the books, and growing the deposits, and the credit, how we're using those flows. And on the credit side, we see that if the credit is out, that's generating demand for expenditures. And so we can see from that what's happening. And we know that if credit is growing faster than the money, then we're eating into something else, the reserves, or whatever balances we have. Or we see the foreign liabilities of the commercial banks go up. So if you want to Google it now, or you look in any of the economic analysis the central bank publishes, even while you're sitting, you will notice that we try in the first paragraph, when we describe what's happening, we say, this happened to external reserve because of that particular relationship or imbalance or balance for what's happening with money and credit. And so once you understand that, you can also tell sometimes when the numbers do not make sense, but they don't always make sense, and that would only mean that somebody is giving you bad data, and so you have to clean it up. So if you're a statistician, looking at that slide also helps for you to understand how the relationship of the flows are going on. And we know that the reserves would reduce if we're using up more resources in the banks that are coming in. And the flip side to this is liquidity, because liquidity ties into what's happening on the central bank's side. And just in a nutshell, when we define liquidity, we define how much excess money commercial banks have with the central bank. And typically, if they're selling foreign exchange to you, the public, and it's more than is coming in, their liquidity is decreasing, meaning they have to use their central bank balances a lot more to supply you with the foreign exchange. And that's when we see the correlation with what is happening with the foreign reserves. And so now the elements of credit, so you could understand that we are operating within a box, constraints. The government is a big part of the credit, the demand for credit. And so what's happening with the government's deficit and how the deficits are financed, that's a big chunk. And then there's the private sector. And in the private sector case, you see, their ability and their interest in borrowing. And so those combined with what happens on the banking side, we see the flows. And the inflows from you as businesses and the like, you deposit it into the bank, they give you $B credit, we see what they're buying in US dollars, in foreign exchange, and we see how that explains growth in deposits, and we know we can explain, or we can see the connection with what's happening with the tourism sector. And so how much is on the inflow side is also telling us how strong the economy is. And in a nutshell, you can think about it this way. If we're only living and spending based upon what we're earning, then the credit and the deposit sides of the balance sheets tend to grow in sync, and they don't disturb what's happening with the foreign reserves. But if we're living beyond the rate at which the flows are coming in, then we see the net drawdown someplace else. On the exchange control side, what we try to focus on is understanding those potential sources for the demand for foreign exchange. So the credit is one, because credit in isolation means how much you're spending more than you're earning, but in the aggregate for the economy, it has a similar meaning. And so it's really at the economic aggregate that we're looking at it from the credit side. So where exchange control fits into the picture is that we are really focusing on managing for the greater part the demand for foreign exchange that are coming from other than the current income side. In the ideal world, no one would really care if the Bahamas or any country just spent as much as they took in, right? We could debate the composition of whether we're spending it on investments or consumption. And we do think about that, but the bottom line is you're only concerned with spending power that's exceeding that. And one of the ways that spending power can exceed it is that liquidity that's sitting in the system. So we have to think always about how that liquidity is going to be used, whether you want to use some of that liquidity to purchase some assets abroad, or whether you want to use some of that liquidity to get your monies out of the countries because you're afraid something is going to happen. So speculatively speaking, you're trying to get out. And the problem is going to be that if you try to cash in all of that liquidity and the reserves are not there to accommodate it. So that means that from a stability point of view, we have to focus on how that liquidity is managed. The other side of exchange control is that, and I'm sure that the banker likes this analogy. When you borrow or someone invests, what makes it a good investment is that it has to be able to pay for itself. And so when you make that an investment that's coming in from the foreign side, it has to be sustainable, whether it's the government's borrowing or private sector borrowing, because if it's not sustainable, then you have to dig into something else to repay it. So a big part of the exchange control framework is looking at how, when you're taking on these debts, those debts are going to help you generate enough foreign exchange on net or save foreign exchange on net so that you can repay those without any concerns. The stakeholders care about whether you're going to lose control of that process and the valuation. You care about the valuation because it could affect your purchasing power. So if you look at your liquidity in the banking system and trying to get out your financial assets, it's your purchasing power. If you're a foreign investor, you care about whether that equation, if it's unstable, is going to constrain your ability to get profits out or to get a repatriation of your capital if you sell your business in the future. So you also care about the stability of the relationship. And you also care about whether if you buy debt of the Bahamas or you give credit to a Bahamian interest, that Bahamian interest is going to be able to find foreign exchange in their marketplace to repay your debt. And we get asked those questions explicitly. And so again, from the exchange control point of view, we also spend a lot of time convincing investors and others that we have a handle on the situation and that even if we're doing things from period to period, we haven't done anything that would cause us to lose control of that process. The alternative is that we can stand completely back, leave it up to the markets, and if you do that, if you leave it entirely up to the market, you're saying, well, if the market needs more foreign exchange than they can find at the given rate, then the exchange rate has to adjust and the market has to regulate its demand that way. So leaving it entirely up to the market means at the extreme, you would have to be prepared to allow the currency to float. The consensus seems to be that we're not ready for that, we're not interested in that, but I can assure you that some stakeholders, when they talk about exchange control and the extent to which you can liberalize, they understand this. And some stakeholders are prepared to embrace this, depending on how they see their ability to benefit or, to move about in that space. And you also have to think about, what could happen if markets are imperfect. I mean, the markets are not perfect. I don't think you could say that the markets are perfect anywhere in the world, but what matters is also how deep are the pockets that you have when it is necessary to steer the markets back in the right direction, and also how you can get the market to have faith in what you're saying so that they cannot run away in a speculative fashion. So the compromise for us is that we want to continue to aspire to relinquish more controls, but never to do it in such a way that we lose track of the stability of the process. So that's the very important part about it. And you don't want to do it such that you say, well, I changed my mind. I think I went too far, let me pull back. Because that could also feed into the way the market responds if you do step back. You want to also keep credibility high in terms of people not being worried about, devaluation and whether the government has strains on its balance sheet that could lead to concerns about devaluation. There's one thing that we're very good about in the Bahamas, I think, is at least being able to connect the dots between how healthy our government's finances are and how we see that as potentially leading to challenges in this space. And so we do hear a lot, the conversations about whether certain events are going to spiral and lead to, us losing control. But I think for the most part, we should be assured that there is a very strong consensus in this country that we do whatever is necessary to keep that stability. The best practice from an international point of view is that even as you try to manage this relationship, you stand out of the way of people doing their everyday transactions, their current account, as we call it, transactions, repatriation of profit, repatriation of capital. But you also make certain that when you're talking about unhindering the rights of investors, you're doing it within a system where the investors have properly entered the market. So the role that exchange control plays typically is in vetting where it needs to vet investments that might be coming in. Because once you've admitted them, you have to grant them the freedom around how the capital could be subsequently altered or profits move about. So that is very important. And the selectivity is around how, even if you want to allow some, speculative type transactions around investments, etc., you're selective in ways that you can still manage the process. We also want in this process to be less and less administrative. And being less and less administrative also means not trying to be ad hoc in how you deal with issues. And so philosophically, one of the things that we've tried to do, right, and even my exchange control colleagues will always remind me of this, right? Whatever we do for one, we have to be able to show how we can generalize it for all. That's always the challenge. And that also speaks to the transparency. And sometimes, admittedly, sometimes you'll say, exceptionally, we will do this or that. Be very careful about that because nothing is private or secret. So even if you do something on an exceptional basis, then everybody else will understand that was what was done, and so why can't you do it in other cases? So again, it's forcing us to always be transparent and be in a position where we can generalize how we apply the treatment. So that is really one of the most important things about our approach. And the way I would summarize it is that you want to you may want to relinquish more control. I'm probably, in the Bahamas, as hard as this might sound, I'm probably one of the more liberal thinking persons about how you would approach exchange control, but it is in the context that is summarized on the screen. Because it also means you have to accept at every point of whatever you do, consequentially, certain impacts. And liberalization also means an economy being able to confront a lot more international competitive pressures, being more open to foreign participation in the economy, et cetera, et cetera. We're not very liberal in those respects. So if you're not very liberal in those respects, then be very careful about how you want to be selectively liberal about your foreign exchange policies. Also understand that you have to have a capacity to manage the process. Capacity also means being able to collect information in a timely basis from the financial institutions, and also to make certain that you maintain the stability of the system. Because less administratively means that you still want to influence the system, but you better have the tools to influence the system in ways that don't look very administratively and heavy-handed. And if you have the market imperfections, you have significant structural vulnerabilities, I won't even list them. You can spend the rest of April talking about the ways in which economies like the Bahamas are vulnerable. And therefore, if that is the case, this is part of your insurance policy. But if you have those vulnerabilities, then you have to find the compromise that you rely upon. And so for us, the compromise arrangement is finding the second or the third best option, which we have now. So I'm sure I used more than the 7 minutes, right? Okay. She's happy for that because I told her I couldn't even make 5. But so I'm certain that the rest of the presentations will have relatable elements that tie in with this. And again, I'm very, very grateful for Mr. Horton because I know in so much of what we would have done during his tenure, it's wrestling with whether whenever you did any change, you were still in a position to maintain the level of control that you needed to maintain of the process. So I will stop there, and I'll wait until later if there are any questions. But I'm sure Mr. Horton again will have those responses, and my exchange control colleagues. So thank you very much, and I'll turn things over to Mr. Horton.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm very happy to be here, Governor Rolle and my former colleagues at Exchange Control, invited guests. I'm an invited guest today, but someone said I'm going home again, so I'm part of family. So thank you for having me. When Ms. Ward's letter of invitation 2 weeks ago came to me, I openly wondered to her if she was certain she wanted me to do this, seeing I had been retired for some time and, in fact, had left the field of banking entirely. I feared I had either not kept sufficiently up to date with developments in the field or forgotten what I once knew. She assured me I was the right person for the assignment. So here I am. I shall do my best for you and for all the former managers of Exchange Control she didn't choose. Our governor has given us a macro view of things, and as he suggests, I think some of what I will say will fit in the Exchange Control administration and historical experience that we've had in the Bahamas. First, I will comment then on the history of exchange controls in the Bahamas, what they are, their origins, and their reason for being. Second, I'll provide an overview of how exchange controls have been applied historically and how they have supported innovation in the marketplace. And third, perhaps presumptuously so, I will offer a comment on their likely future. So what are exchange controls and when did they begin? And this is the classic definition you'll read, I think, in the annual reports and other publications. They are the set of rules, policies, and procedures which govern foreign currency transactions between residents of one country, in this case the Bahamas, and residents of foreign countries, commonly referred to as non-residents. For the Bahamas, exchange controls were legally established by the Exchange Control Act 1948 during the colonial era. Great Britain led what was known as the Sterling Area, or Scheduled Territories, which comprised its Commonwealth possessions, where in economic and financial matters, a common feature was the pooling and management of the gold and foreign currency reserves of the area at the Bank of England, in the interest of all member states. Britain no doubt wanted to ensure financial and economic stability at home and in the territories. Member states had to obtain approval of the Bank of England for a range of transactions. And this was one of the surprises to me early in my career at Exchange Control, seeing stamped approvals or written letters between the Bank of England and the local authority. In the post-war period of the late 1950s and 1960s, the Sterling Area would disband as Britain moved toward closer relations with its European neighbors. In many countries of the Sterling bloc, having won political independence from Great Britain, pursued their own agenda in monetary and economic affairs. The Bahamas, after a period of internal self-government, would achieve its independence in 1973. It had acted early to put in place the institutional structures and policies needed for its own governance. Among those institutional structures was the Central Bank of the Bahamas, established by statute in June 1974. The bank, successor to its forerunner bodies, the Currency Board and the Bahamas Monetary Authority, assumed responsibility for exchange controls. The Exchange Control Regulations Act of 1956 and the series of notices to authorized dealers which flow from them have historically governed the administrative actions of the bank. So, as I have implied in my earlier comment, exchange controls exist to assist the central bank achieve sound financial stability of the economy. And I think Governor Rolle's comments have given us a very broad and expansive view of this strategy goal. They're tied directly to the management of the country's foreign exchange rate policy, which I term the bank's prime mandate. That policy, first set in 1974, fixes the value of the Bahamian dollar at a ratio of 1 Bahamian dollar to 1 United States dollar. To defend the value, the central bank must maintain a reserve of foreign currency to ensure that resources are available to meet the external payment needs of the country. The level of reserves are also an indicator of the strength of the economy. It makes sense to peg the value of the Bahamian dollar to the United States dollar, since the United States of America is our major trading partner. Some countries have linked their currency to a basket of currencies consistent with the currencies of their major trading partners for the same reason. Experience has shown that in countries where the currency value is not fixed, there are frequent fluctuations in value. And though this is never a fatal occurrence in large, economically diversified and developed countries, for small economies like the Bahamas, characterized by a narrow economic base with a high import requirement relative to its exports, it can be. Having a fixed exchange rate, then, is beneficial. And I want to list 3 benefits. 1, it protects the currency from large swings in value. 2, it makes the country attractive to outside investors and strengthens prospects for employment and growth. 3, it reduces the cost of servicing the country's external debt. The more stable and higher the value of the currency, the lower the cost of debt servicing. Over the years, the bank has employed a number of measures. And I refer to Governor's good presentation of the economic connections and relationships that are nurtured and supported by the bank's policies. I just want to list for you a number of measures which the central bank has observed, mainly through exchange control, in managing the exchange rate, discharging, I call it, its prime mandate. 1, it actively monitored demand for foreign currency and allocated resources to ensure disciplined use of the reserves, thus ensuring adequate reserve cover. There's a rule of thumb standard of 3 months' worth. 2, it invested resources which are surplus to current requirements. And I want you to think about that, because if you think of it on an individual or personal level, we spend money to cover our daily expenses. Those are current requirements. We pay our light bills, we pay our water bill, we pay for the children's school fees and all food and all of these things that we need to do always. And then if we have some extra money, we save it, we put it in an account, we invest it in something until we need it for a rainy day, for some future goal. And in the same way, the central bank does that for the economy. Colleagues in exchange control and colleagues in banking have historically worked together. We, in exchange control, we monitor demand, and in the other side of it, they place those surplus funds, short-term, long-term, until we need them, depending on the picture for demand in the marketplace. So we think about that. Number 3, it supported allocations to the productive sector, and I think, again, Governor Rolle talked about the value of that, where these activities had the potential to lower imports while increasing earnings through exports, reflecting the view that GDP in small open economies will expand through export-led growth. Number 4, it ensured that all legitimate flows to and from the economy were properly evidenced and recorded. In this way, the bank was able to formulate accurate statistics of these transactions and identify any negative trends which, if left unchecked, could result in the loss of reserves. Number 5, it followed an accommodative yet balanced approach consistent with international norms. For example, as an Article 8 member of the International Monetary Fund, the Bahamas undertakes not to impose restrictions on currency transfers except in the interest of protecting the balance of payments. And so it only imposed restrictions on capital account transactions. Perhaps a word here about balance of payments, a term which I've now used at least twice in my presentation. Balance of payment statistics produced by the central bank documents all transaction flows on trade and goods and services, earnings and investments, and other economic activities. They offer insight on particular areas of the economy and whether we are in a trade deficit or surplus. Such information is crucial to policymakers. And much of this information is generated by exchange control. Number 6, it conducted responsible money and credit policies, recognizing that actions on credit could affect demand for foreign reserves. Again, I refer you to Governor Rolle's presentation. He did speak of the same point. Number 7, it required commercial banks, the official channel through which foreign currency enters the system and which operate within prescribed limits, that is to say, foreign currency vis-a-vis Bahamian dollar transactions, to sell excess foreign currency to the central bank. I'm referring here, I think, to something called the B-dollar open position and how that impacts on availability of funds within their portfolio to lend. And number 8, it committed earlier on to a policy of gradual liberalization and creation of an efficient marketplace. I would also add there that along the way, in terms of that history, we moved from that paper-based system that was referred to, where you had to come in and fill out the forms and all of that, and very heavily paper-based. We are now, when I was here, we were moving very inexorably toward a digital electronic system of storage and approval. So my thought is that by now it's probably gotten a lot more efficient than when I left. Now, you should know that the measures I have listed are all still observed today because our basic economic model, the prime mandate of the bank, has not changed. While current account transfers are free, subject only to administrative limits, capital account transfers have been restricted because the volume of these transactions have greater impact for foreign reserves and the balance of payments. The IMF does not prohibit such restriction, leaving the time and place for removal up to the domestic authorities. Reflecting the challenge, the central bank did not attempt to liberalize provisions of the capital account until January 2006, even though it had rolled out the very first round of measures 11 years earlier in 1995. The 2006 measures aimed to enhance overseas investment opportunities to residents, and with the earlier advent of BISX, the Bahamian Stock Exchange, to deepen the local capital markets. Notable among them were measures covering a reduction in the investment currency market rate, real estate investments, timeshares, emigration, cross-border listings, and Bahamian depository receipts, or BDRs. The Bahamian Depository Receipt Program, along with 2 earlier established programs, namely foreign-branded Bahamian-based credit cards and money transfer businesses, MTBs, are examples of how the central bank, through exchange control, has supported market innovation while respecting its prime mandate. They are all well-known programs in the market today, but they were once novel ideas. The Exchange Control Department assessed their potential impact on the foreign currency reserves and, as appropriate, vetted issues of ownership and ensured each scheme satisfied all legal and administrative requirements. In the case of the MTBs, which operate as standalone money transfer services outside the bosom of commercial banks, the authorities were obliged to develop new legal and administrative guidelines before such schemes could be properly accommodated within the system. Largely because of this, the first case took 5 years to resolve. Its eventual success also owed a great deal to the doggedness of its promoters and their unwavering belief in its prospects. My sense is the central bank continues in this posture of openness and support of ideas which promote meaningful progress and market efficiency. Of the future, change is the only thing that seems certain, and perhaps exchange control too. From its genesis in war and the sterling area of colonial times, from the currency board and monetary authority to an independent central bank and their uses as tools of financial stability in a growing economy, exchange controls in the Bahamas have endured while change continues afoot. The British would eventually join and later exit the European Union. Post-Brexit, it set itself to pivot towards booming Asia. It is still trying to achieve stability and economic success. BRICS, the powerful group of emerging economies, seek to dethrone the US dollar from its place of dominance in trade and other financial arrangements by building, quote, financial infrastructures that embrace local currencies, end quote, and where transactions cross borders without the US dollar as the middleman. It envisages a system powered by digital technologies and blockchain as it chips away at the dollar's dominance through de-dollarization. BRICS is calling on countries around the globe to rethink their economic allegiances in trade and transactions. So what might such looming global systemic changes, should they succeed, mean for countries like ours? In the past, our historic link to the US dollar and economy sometimes led to conversations about dollarization, that is, the adoption of the US dollar as a few countries have done, not de-dollarization. Such conversations have always been tempered by traditional arguments against it, like sovereignty and the loss of control over monetary policy in the domestic market. It seems to me that in the absence of any major shift in our trading pattern or broader and sustained transformation of the Bahamian economy, we will likely continue to view the existing currency arrangements as optimal for our needs. And so, a final word. I recently met an individual who remembered me from my time in exchange control. We both lamented how things had changed in the banking world. No longer a regulator, I was experiencing those changes from the other side. But he was very happy about recent changes which the bank had made in the exchange control regime, adding, they should have done so long ago. But could the bank have done so long ago as he suggested? As I've tried to show in the development of exchange control, responsible change often occurred slowly and within the framework of broader established priorities. As individuals, we desire the freedom to spend our money unfettered by any authority putting limits on how or what we can do with it. After all, we earned it. Should we not have the right to spend it as we please? So far, no one has seen his way clear to do away with exchange controls, as a former prime minister was once reported as saying he would if he could. That would surely have given us the greater freedom many crave, wouldn't it? And all without fear of violating any law. I suggest that no one has seen his way clear because there is a recognition of how well these rules, policies, and procedures have served our collective good. Perhaps the lesson to be learned is that it is okay to bear an inconvenience for the good of someone else. Perhaps, too, conditions would soon allow the scope of liberalized limits to be so generous and the marketplace experience so efficient that we won't even recognize that the rules are there. I think the governor was pointing us in that direction, that's the posture of the bank, is to step so far back, and you won't even know that we have these laws in place. Ladies and gentlemen, 50 years ago, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth stopped at my position in the receiving line for staff of the central bank at the opening of the new central bank building. I had just joined the staff of the research department, and she asked me, "So what are you researching?" I couldn't give her an answer because I did not yet know enough about the bank and its functions to do so. You know, Governor, I still believe that was a setup. All of my colleagues, Bert Sherman and all those guys were so much more experienced, and there I was, right out of high school, didn't know anything. And they got me in the front of the line. Anyway, she saw my plight and tried to help me by asking how to confuse the minister. And everyone laughed. Well, I've had 50 years to figure it out. I thought maybe the bank remembered that inauspicious start to my central banking career and decided to give me a second chance at telling you what I did. In any case, I hope rather than confuse anyone, I have provided a helpful perspective on the development and practice of exchange controls in the Bahamas and the historic role of the central bank in this important function. It has been my honor to address you. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ashlee Bethel, and I am an assistant manager in the Exchange Control Department. I'll be presenting on the consumer aspect of exchange control. This evening, we will cover Exchange Control Current Account Liberalizations 2024, foreign currency accounts, and later on, my colleague Aniska Russell, who is a senior exchange control officer in the Exchange Control Department, will be presenting on exchange control capital account liberalizations. These liberalizations were put in place to make it easier on residents accessing foreign currency. When I speak on delegated authority, these are authorities given to commercial banks and money transmission businesses to operate and carry out certain transactions on behalf of the central bank. Now, who does these liberalizations apply to? These apply to residents and temporary residents. How do we classify residents? A resident is a natural or naturalized Bahamian citizen or a permanent resident with no restrictions on employment. A temporary resident, these are holders of resident spouse permits or work holder permits. Also, these are permanent residents who have no restrictions, who have restrictions on the right in a certain profession. So today we'll start on gift payments. Recently, as of April 1st, 2024, gift payments has been delegated to the commercial bank up to $100,000 limit. So if a resident or a temporary resident want to go to the commercial bank, they can go and make that payment to a non-resident individual, a church, or a charitable organization up to $100,000. An example is if an individual or entity wanted to send a donation to an organization such as St. Jude's Children's Hospital, they're able to go and make that donation up to $100,000. Any gift remittances over that amount, an application still would need to be made to the Exchange Control Department at ecd@centralbankbahamas.com. Kindly note, Bahamians cannot send a gift to a Bahamian abroad unless that recipient has permanent immigration status abroad, such as a permanent resident card, and they have been reclassified for exchange control purposes as a non-resident, which then would make that Bahamian a non-resident. A very common question is, how is a Bahamian citizen reclassified as a non-resident for exchange control purposes? This process is called immigration, and this is with an E, not an I. It does not change a person from being a Bahamian, but it just notes that they have now moved abroad and they are now reclassified as non-resident. So the letter would basically state that the Exchange Control Department would issue would be John Doe has now moved to the United States of America and they are now reclassified as non-resident for exchange control purposes. We then have travel business, and the limit for this is $15,000 per trip. These are related to cash transactions only, but we have went ahead and liberalized up to $100,000 per trip, but the $15,000 is still for the cash transaction. So the $100,000, it applies to wire transfers. So if a business entity wanted to pay a tour company or pay for transportation, they may now go ahead and send those remittances abroad up to $100,000 at their local commercial bank. We then have conversion of B dollar for insurance premiums. This was delegated now to the local commercial banks. Previously, it required central bank approval. Conversion of B dollar for insurance claims such as benefit payments. This required the prior approval of the central bank, but as of April 1st, 2024, we have delegated these payments to the authorized dealers up to $1 million. Conversion of B dollar for royalty payments. So any franchisee wanting to pay their franchisor, they are now able to go directly to the local commercial bank and pay that franchisor. I know many restaurants or even shoe stores, they may have franchisors that they have to pay. They can go directly to that commercial bank now and pay those fees. We also have B dollar credit cards to temporary residents and pension payments to non-residents. These have now been delegated on to the commercial banks. Support payments. This is in relation to alimony and child support under court order or not. Previously, this was liberalized for those under court order, but now we have added for those that are not under court order to be sent abroad up to $100,000. So they can just go to the commercial bank. And this is if you have a non-resident child living abroad, you may send monies out to that child up to $100,000. Also, we have reconversion of funds inadvertently converted to Bahamian dollars. This has now been delegated to the commercial banks. Remittances for car rental and hotels booked through Bahamian-owned travel agencies. Earlier, I spoke about businesses. That was if the businesses were acting on its own behalf, but this is for more Bahamian travel agencies, so they can now go to the commercial bank and send out those funds to the car rental places or hotels. We have rental payment to non-residents. This has also been delegated to the local commercial bank. And this is if a non-resident has a property here and they are renting that to a local Bahamian citizen, they can go ahead and they can put those funds on their foreign currency account without reference to the central bank. Standby letters of credit, custom bonds, and refunds to external Bahamian dollar account has also been liberalized to the commercial bank as of April 1st, 2024. Next, we have foreign currency accounts. And this is a very important aspect if you have a business and a business license. You are able to go to that commercial bank and open up an account up to $100,000. But please note that this account must be funded from deposited revenues in foreign currency. It is subject to internal know your customer and due diligence process of that commercial bank, and it does not require the central bank prior approval. It's restricted to external payments, and no reporting to the central bank on activities across this account is required. I'll now turn the presentation over to Ms. Aniska Russell.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Aniska Russell, and I am a Senior Exchange Control Officer in the Exchange Control Department. This evening, I will be presenting on capital account liberalization. Previously, can you hear me? Okay. Previously, temporary residents borrowing in B dollar increased from Bahamian 400,000 to Bahamian 1 million for temporary residents that resided in the Bahamas for at least 3 years. But currently, the residency requirement was removed for temporary residents borrowing to finance owner-occupied dwelling. But please note that borrowing for investment purposes, including purchases of vacant property, duplexes, mixed-use residential rental property, and second homes still require the prior approval of the central bank. For foreign direct investments in the Bahamas, previously the central bank liberalized exchange control on non-residents purchases and sale of residential transactions between non-residents to non-residents, non-residents to residents, and residents to non-residents. Under this liberalization, this enabled non-residents, whether they establish a company to purchase or sell property in their name, if that property was for strictly residential purposes, the prior approval of the central bank is not required. But currently, under the April 1st liberalization, the central bank went a little further on capital transactions to include non-residential mixed-use real estate. The capital transactions include designation of companies formed to acquire residential property, approve investment status with respect to non-residents injections utilized in the acquisition of the property in the Bahamas, permission to retain and remit the proceeds of sale, permission to convert and remit the proceeds of sale, the issuance or transfer of shares for the benefit of non-residents that hold residential property. For example, if a client established a company to purchase or sell property for the non-residential mixed-use vacant lands, firms would not have to submit an application for designation, approve investment status, or conversion or retention. They can go directly to their commercial banks to make the transactions. Also, if a Bahamian is buying or selling a property from a non-resident, they no longer have to apply to the central bank. Once it falls under this liberalization, they can go directly to the commercial bank for this. Also, in the April 1st, 2024 liberalization, transactions involving nominee share transfers, central bank approval is no longer required for the transfer of nominee shares. However, the central bank should be notified in writing of any change in shareholding. Bahamian access to foreign current financing was liberalized on the 1st of April capital account liberalization. Prior, Bahamians needed 2 refusal letters from commercial banks and submit an application to the central bank, but currently, you no longer need 2 refusal letters, so this means that a Bahamian can go to a local bank like RBC and apply for a foreign currency financing. However, if the Bahamian does not get the financing locally, they can go abroad for the foreign currency financing. Overdraft facilities for resident-designated businesses was also liberalized on the 1st of April. These facilities may be provided by a commercial bank provided the underlying account has been approved by the central bank. This is the form of the April 1st liberalization. This can be found on the central bank website at www.centralbankbahamas.com. Now for our resident Bahamians. Do you know that the central bank offers 2 programs where Bahamians can invest in assets abroad? This includes in the Bahamas Depository Receipts, the BDR, which Mr. Horton spoke on, and the investment currency market. Under the BDR program, Bahamians can invest in foreign currency assets by using Bahamian dollars at no premium. Bahamians can gain profits and returns on investments in foreign assets. The BDR program is available through BizX companies business license brokers dealers such as CG Atlantic Pensions, Leno Corporate Services Limited, RF Bank and Trust, CFAL, and Benchmark Advisors Bahamas. Now we're going to talk about the investment currency market. The ICM is a facility through which Bahamians are able to purchase foreign currency to invest in assets abroad. The premium on investment currency purchases and sales by residents was reduced to 5% and 2.5% respectively from levels of 12.5% and 10%, which Mr. Horton briefly spoke about. But effective June 1st, the ICM will be delegated to authorize dealers up to Bahamian $100,000 per individual investor per year for Bahamians that want to invest abroad. Through the ICM, Bahamians can purchase stocks, bonds, international securities, and crypto assets. Yes. In our approval letter for the ICM, permission is granted for Bahamians to purchase US dollars for their investments. And if a Bahamian decides to repatriate the proceeds back to the Bahamas, that Bahamian will receive 2.5% on the amount that we previously approved for the investment. So all applications that are not delegated can be made to the central bank, to the ECD department at the central bank at ecd@centralbankbahamas.com. Thank you. Do you have any questions? You have any questions?
Just to know that the questions can be from any of the presentations. So feel free to share your questions or comments.
You want to come up?
Thank you. I just have a question. I raised this from my own experience of the past, how the bank thought of the investment currency market. For all intents and purposes, when historically it was outside, a single institution managed this pool of funds for residents, and we brought it into the bank. And I guess for all intents and purposes, it ceased to be a functioning market per se, because we were selling foreign exchange from the bank's reserve position. And I've noticed you say that you've now delegated it back there to do all the banks will have this privilege of servicing this need. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and that's you're just requiring the customers to pay a premium.
If it's over 100,000, they have to write into us.
I see.
Up to 100,000.
Speak into the mic. No.
I'm sorry.
So it's delegated up to 100,000. Anything over that, they will have to write into us at ecd@centralbankbahamas.com for approval.
And this is from your presentation, Aniska. And I just want to clarify and be clear on it. So the central bank then still retains the right to provide the approval, or that's been delegated as well? The
Up
approval
to-
for the ICM?
Up to 100,000, it's been delegated, but anything over, the central bank can still approve, yes.
Okay,
They've
that's
sub-
clearer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just one other clarification on investment currency. So the premium is still there. And the administrative process is once the banks complete the transaction, the premium passes along to the central bank. So we still maintain a register of who is entitled to the 2.5% on redemption. And administratively, there's a portion of the 5% that the central bank is also relinquishing to the commercial banks in the process. So the previous investment currency arrangement used to be that the purchase and the sale used to be made directly against the central bank, but now that is all delegated to the commercial banks, and we just do the accounting in regards to the premium. So it means that we also relieve ourselves of the AML, KYC, and other due diligence, because the banks have the equipment to do that.
This liberalization is well and good and must be welcoming, but my question is more from policy point of view. What kind of assurances the policy makers thought of in making this liberalization, because it will mean a lot of outflow of the foreign exchange reserves?
The outflow is the calculation that we're always doing. That is trying to assess whether there's going to be a major shift in one direction or the other. For the most part, liberalization is impacting the composition and not the quantity. So, and for the areas that we're dealing with, the investment currency market in 2023 was almost $200 million. If we add the BDRs to that, we'd get above 200 million. From 2019, going back to 2010, 2011, collectively, those two markets may have averaged, 30-something to 40 million. And the context there is that the foreign exchange market collectively is over 8 billion. So as a percentage of that market, a lot of this is really just impacting how the flows are moving. And to the extent that you have those limitations, most of us are operating out of whatever personal surpluses we have or earnings flows. So we see the flows the same time as, see the inflows the same time as we are seeing the outflows. So there's less of a concern there. But in the measures, we do mention that you could have accredited investors, which in the Securities Commission terminology means that there are some investors who could make multi-million-dollar transactions. And so we still get to see those, and we have the flexibility also to manage the expectation as to whether that's a lump sum or it's staged. And so for those types, we do try to manage those as carefully as we can.
Good evening. I was wondering if someone could give some, clarification or speak to how does sand dollar factor into the entire liberalization equation?
Sand dollar doesn't really affect the equation. That is like your physical cash. That can't leave the Bahamas any easier than your physical cash, because somebody in a commercial bank still would need to exchange for you the foreign currency. So that is very, very important for everyone to understand in the entire process. The financial institutions are the channel through which all of the flows are taking place. And so the conversions are happening when they look at the reasons why the funds are being applied. And even when the funds leave the Bahamas and channeled through other financial institutions, they're also looking at it in terms of why or where the monies are coming from. So once we have the regulatory requirements around how they're expected to conduct business, and we can follow up on those, then for all intents and purposes, they are the gatekeepers. And so what we're doing really is appreciating the fact that they have increasing capacity to be the gatekeepers and to send us the reports back on the breakdown of what's happening. So that's really the very important enabling factor in this.
Hi. Just a quick question. I know that you said that the outflows you're constantly calculating that, and you mentioned earlier that you guys do projections. So I'm just curious to know what the forecast is, like how many years do you project out?
We don't We don't do at that level, but there are two things that I would encourage everyone to pay attention to. Is that it's the liquidity in the system, because then that is a potential for persons to present themselves, for funds to leave the country, and we would have to make certain at all times that we have the amount of foreign exchange to match up to the liquidity. So for us, it's more understanding what's happening with the liquidity and the potential that that liquidity has to create surprises. But it's not going to create any surprises for us insofar as your consumption is concerned. That's pretty much fixed. What is going to surprise us is if you decide you want to use a large amount of those funds to for investment or other purposes. And that helps explain why the greater focus is how you manage the investment side of the equation and those transactions, particularly the very rapid, potentially movable investments. So the financial balances. If you could leave here and send $1 million tomorrow to a bank account abroad, and you multiply that a couple times over, that would be more the concern. And so looking at the liquidity helps to square that away.
Two questions, Governor. The first question is, in many cases, the limit is 100,000. How was that number chosen?
It lines up with the principle that you take off small bites and you see the utilization. So it gives us the opportunity to see the kind of response that we get. The more important change that we did recently was when we lowered the premium to 5%. But we lowered the premium to 5%. We allowed Bahamians to have their portfolios with the local trust companies and some of the others, so they did not have to report every time they bought or sold. And when we did that, with the other changes around about 2019 or thereabouts, that's when we saw the growth in terms of the total upshoot in terms of transactions. So the $100,000, if you look at it, it is really more, honestly, reducing the administrative frequency at which people are going to be coming to us for transactions. We've already seen an uptick in interest, but now those individuals can go directly to the commercial banks, and the commercial banks will look at what they're doing and see how to classify the transactions.
The second question is related to that same limit. So, for example, if somebody presents at one commercial bank to gift somebody $100,000 and then presents to another commercial bank to gift another $100,000, is the limits, if it's not being not being reconciled in real time, can people then kind of abuse that liberalization point?
The gift, I'm glad you used the gift example, right? Because for all of the categories that there is exchange control approval, the limits are typically how much you allow the commercial bank to approve without prior reference. Some persons have had gifts, multi-million dollars. So in those cases, we would see those directly. So it is really just to say that for the outsized transactions, you have more leisure in terms of how you approve those and sequence those. And so from that point of view, those dollar limits really apply more so for what the commercial bank would process and what they would refer to us. The other thing that matters, Mr. Horton touched on it, is that as the banks buy or sell US dollars or foreign exchange in aggregate, they have to correct their position against the central bank. So we see the aggregate pictures, and we see whenever there are sales that they have to make to the central bank, or if they're coming into the central bank to make purchases. So we see those aggregates, and we could also use those to judge how the markets are doing.
Governor, just to carry on to the question previously, that $100,000 limit, is that per event, per annum?
For investment currency, it's per annum. So on an annual basis, you can transact up to the 100,000. For most of the other transactions we talk about, it's per transaction. But be reasonable. We are not stupid. You still can't spend more money than you have.
Yeah.
You can't spend more than you earn. And so we're always looking at the earnings. And we can see what's going on. So that is what's very, very important here. And you know what the statistics are in terms of who has the liquidity in the banking system, right? It's maybe 5% of the depositors, not the 85% of the depositors. So again, if you're looking at who's going to be over these limits, it's going to be a very small fraction of the total persons in the system.
So I just wanted to take the time to thank our presenters for some very insightful comments and remarks. I want to particularly thank Mr. Horton for coming out of retirement to give us this presentation. You more than made up for, in your example about the question, you've definitely more than made up for that. Your presentation was very clear and very rich with historical and conceptual insight. So thank you very much. We want to also invite you for a cocktail reception following this event. If there's an opportunity for you to interact with the presenters a bit more, if you have any further comments or questions that you may have been a little bit shy to share in the open format, and it's upstairs. I would also want to, you would have noticed the backdrop of vibrant colors. We have an exhibition open by Douglas Parker. I saw our curator here earlier, but I don't know if he's still around, so he can probably answer any questions you may have on this exhibition. But please take the time to take a look at the photography. I want to also make a plug for our lecture that's coming up in June 12th at the Hilton. We're going to have a lecture and panel discussion that's going to be will be an excellent opportunity to continue this discussion as well as touch on other matters relevant to the Bahamian economy. So please plan to attend, as well as, the learning series. This is not a one-off event. We'll have a number of other lectures planned, both in person and virtual. So please plan to attend. I see that someone had a question.
I want to know, if I'm going to attend these, how am I going to earn credits for my professional? You're not NASDAQ certified.
Well, that's something we'll probably have to look into. Well, I'm sure, I hope that. All right, but thank you for your question. And again, thank you for our guests for coming out and listening to the panelists. Enjoy and drive safely.